What did we talk about the last 2 days? What was our topic? On cult and the emotion, all the dramas. I don't know. Does anybody have any particular requests before we start? Anybody got any burning questions or particular topics? You want to talk about the mind? Do you want to talk about compassion? Do you want to talk about emptiness? Do you want to talk about karma? Do you want to talk about purification? Anything in particular? We can start with that and see where it goes.
I vote for karma.
You vote for karma, Vanessa. What else, people? Any other thoughts? Any other requests? Request time.
Enlightenment.
What?
Enlightenment.
That's the end result, Sasha. That's it. That's the end result. So all the things that I mentioned are the things we have to do and practice to get to enlightenment.
Okay. Purification.
Purification.
Right. Well done. Okay. Purification.
Second vote for karma. A second vote for karma.
Okay. Karma and purification. It sounds like we're on to karma then. Well, it's going to touch on everything else anyway. Okay. So let's just start with that little aspiration, a little prayer to put us in the right direction. Thinking we're going to listen all together. We're going to listen to these teachings. We'll do a little mandala offering. So what that is we're going to just make a little kind of imagine, use our creative imagination, imagine all the marvelous things of the world, piling them all up and offering them to the Buddha as a request. That's the plan, as a request for the teaching, that first little one. And the second one, we're going to just make this aspiration that we're going to listen to these words. And this is including me, I promise, even though I'm talking. Going to listen so we can take some tools from it to help us develop our amazing potential so we can be of help to others. So we can indeed, as Sasha said, get enlightened. That's the end result. That's the end result. Okay. So if you just imagine, or you can just sing these prayers as you wish, sing the words, or imagine piling up all the marvelous things. As it says, this ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers. What's that in English? This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon, measure all the beautiful things in the world. I imagine this is a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. So we can sing this next little one, make a request to hear the teachings. Jetsun Lama Jampa Kienam Ki Chöku Kala Kense Chutsin Trik Jita Tsampe Jul Jetsun Mala Zabge Chöki Chapa Up to Sol. We imagine Buddha very happily accepting our offering. Idam Guru Rashna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. And the next one. This is stating our purpose. We're going to listen to these teachings, the second two lines, so we can take these tools so we can develop our marvelous potential so we can help others. That's really what we're saying. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create, all the virtuous karma we create by listening to these teachings, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye charang soke chognam la, jangcho badu dagni kyap suchi, dagi chonyen gi personam ki, drola penche sangye drupa shok. Sangye charang soke chognam la, jangcho badu dagni kyap suchi, dagi chonyen gi personam ki, drola penche sangye drupa shok. Okay, so, oops. Oh, what happened? Okay, so, it was interesting. The first time I ever heard these teachings from Lama Zopa years and years ago, I saw a poster and it said Lama Yeshe, so I had the time and the place to do it. So I went to this 1 month retreat. I had no idea what to expect. I'd never heard a single Buddhist word in my whole life. And it was back in the 70s, so it was quite new, and there was a big packed with people. Lama Zopa gave this 1 month intensive course on what, as we now know, if we've listened to the teachings, this packaging of the Buddha's teachings called the Lam Rim. I knew nothing about this. So I had no conception of what Buddhism was, no idea. I think I might have seen some Zen books. I had some vague notion, but I was very compelled to go to this course. So all I know is I didn't have a clue. I was lost completely in what Lama Zopa was saying, because it was not because I couldn't hear the English. I mean, he spoke good English, but it was just this, I had no idea what to do with it all. Just this unbelievably, seemingly arcane, abstract, philosophical views, and I didn't know what to do with them. I had no idea what to do with them, you know. And I think this is interesting. This is one, I think, of the major problems with us in the West. Because, and all these more, now 40, 50 years, Buddhism's been around, it's so popular. But there's this very strong misconceptions in the West when we think of meditation. You know, we see a person sitting, we imagine a person sitting quietly with their eyes closed and something kind of magical and mysterious happening inside. And I'm being a little bit sarcastic here, but I think it's kind of true still. So then we hear about mindfulness, and then we think of some kind of alternative to a pill, and it's something you do when you have problems, and we think of it as meditation, something this isolated activity when you sit with your eyes closed. So with all these conceptions about it. Now I don't know what conceptions I had then, but all I know is I didn't know what to do with all this intensive information, all this theoretical concepts about reincarnation and this and the universe and different realms of existence, and I had no concept. I didn't know what to do with it. And that's often, even now, when people hear all these extensive, when you hear about how there are these monastic university system in India, in Tibet, which is tracking itself back from the great Nalanda tradition in the 7th, 8th, 9th century in India. And you think, well, I know myself, even when I first became a Buddhist, and various things, I wanted to become a nun. There was some strong karmic connection to do that. And I heard how people studied philosophy. I remember thinking, what are they talking about? I didn't understand the point. It didn't make sense to me. And this is a really common thing, you know? So even though I sat there for that 1 month with Lama Zopa, somehow, I mean, I had the connection to be there. There was no question, you know, because here I am now, 44 years later. 44 years later, exactly, this month practically. So there was something there, and I kind of vaguely knew that, but I didn't know what to do with this information. Comprehend. And I think even now that's really not uncommon. I remember people often say when they're listening to all the teachings, I don't want to hear philosophical ideas, I want to practice, they say. I want to meditate, you know. So the thing is, anyway, the thing is that to be a Buddhist, the real point, what you're trying to do, this is where it seems pretty abstract, but this is the point, and we're getting to karma here, that somehow, if you think of it, that what Buddhism is actually, and how it's studied and presented and practiced, coming from this amazing monastic university system in Tibet, tracking itself back to the great monastic university system in India, what Buddhism actually is an entire world view. It is a really detailed presentation of how the world exists, philosophically speaking. It is absolutely an entire presentation of intricate and detailed system of ethics. It is definitely a system of understanding the physical universe. They did use the word science back in India because they didn't speak Greek. You know, we make all our fancy words Greek, don't we, you know? So it is all of those things. It is psychology. I mean, the view of the mind in Buddhism is astonishingly vast and deep and precise, you know? So it's all of these things. So then you think, well, why would I want to study it? Go to one of these monastic universities and study for 20, 30, 40 years, which is what they do. Sometimes less, but minimum before you get your degree. I mean, many Westerners are doing this now. There's a German nun called Kelsang Wongmo, who studied she did 20 years of study, and she finally became a geshe. All our nuns now in Kathmandu are becoming geshes, this degree, you know, after 20 years of study. So you think, well, what are you studying? And then the real question is, what's that got to do with meditation? What's that got to do with whatever you're trying to do as a Buddhist? So the simple way to understand, although it is simple, it's hard for us to hear it because we can't join the dots. Essentially, what Buddha's saying is this. Right now, the way we think about the world and on the basis of which we then act, he's saying, for example, let's just give an example. We might think that you're made by a creator. There's a soul and it's given to you by God. We might think that if we're materialists, that mummy and daddy create me and that my mind is the brain. We might think, therefore, in both those cases, that you begin in your mother's womb. And if in the materialist case, when you die, you turn into a bit of dust. I mean, that's a view that's existing in the world, isn't it? I mean, that's not everybody thinks that, but we materialists, so arrogant, we think that's the truth and everybody else is an idiot, you know? but it's simply a philosophical presentation. I mean, there's these countless numbers of viewpoints around the world about how things exist. I always quote the Australian Aboriginals sitting there very happily for 40,000 years, developing their extraordinary, unusual view of the universe. They refer to it as the dream time until, you know, white people came along and made a big mess. Everywhere you go, you've got human beings over the centuries coming up with their findings, their viewpoints about how things exist. We kind of get it when we understand it that way. So now what's the point of that? Why do we even need to think about how things exist? Well, this is Buddha's point. This is his fundamental point. He is saying the extent to which we believe in things about the self, about happiness, about suffering, about the universe, about how things exist, the extent to which we believe in things that he says from his experience simply aren't true, is the extent to which we suffer. So what he is doing, he's presenting, Buddhism is actually a presentation of his and anybody else who's followed the same methodology and come to the same conclusion and achieve the same results. Basically, what Buddhism, what he's saying, this is how the world is. So, for example, he would say the mind or consciousness is not your brain. He doesn't mean we haven't got a brain, but that's not the mind. He would say that it's not physical. He would say that it's beginningless and endless. I mean, this is hilarious if you think of a creator, and it's even more hilarious if you think you're materialist. And so he would say, no, consciousness is not physical and it's beginningless and endless. We don't need creating. Mummy and Daddy absolutely do not make us. They give us a body, no problems. He says everything we think and do and say produces the person we become step by step, day by day, year by year, life by life. We are the creators of ourselves. He says it's like this. He says this is what he has found to be true. He has found it to be true that mind is beginningless and endless. He's found it to be true from his own experience that it's not physical. He's found it to be true the law of karma applies, that what we think and do and say produces the person we become. He's found it to be so that everything has nothing has an intrinsic nature. He's found, I mean, this, in other words, all the nuts and bolts of what we call Buddhism, Buddhist psychology, Buddhist physics, Buddhist metaphysics, Buddhist psychology, Buddhist this, Buddhist that. When we think of these things, we think, well, that's interesting. That's a religion. So somebody's come along and made it up. They've got the Australians make up something and the Indian Americans make up something and the Chinese make up something. And we call it religion, and it's made up by somebody and then it's imposed upon us. But when we think of the materialist world, we think, oh, that's real. So in the same way that we believe in the materialist world, we know the truth. It is true the mind is the brain. It is true your mother and father made you. We believe that. Buddha says, no, I'm sorry, you're wrong. You're mistaken. Which is a bit of a shock to us because we think we're the smarty pants. We think we know everything, and all these weird wacko religions, and even though we might be respectful to the Australian Aboriginals, we probably think their view is ridiculous because we think science, real, solid, present, materialist, philosophical views are the truth. Buddha says, sorry guys, big mistake. His view is true. So this, of course, is what we then think of religion. And that's why we'll have our fights, you know. Jesus says he's right, and then Islam says they're right, and the Australian Aboriginals say they're right. No, I mean, that's fine. You see, this is the point now. Anyone is allowed to say they're right. Of course, they're allowed to say they're right. Einstein has the right to call a meeting and present his findings about relativity. And we hope, actually, that he is right. If he's going to open his mouth, we hope he's done his market. I hope he's done his homework, you know. So then he presents what he has found to be true. But we know that he's not going to shove it down our throats. We know he's not going to ask us to believe it. We know it didn't come from on high, from revelation. We know it comes from his own hard work of observation. And then he says, here's my methodology. So now it's over to you. So that's exactly the Buddha. But the huge, interesting, fascinating point about the Buddha is this. You know, you could not know a single word about E equals MC squared and you can learn to still be happy. You can not know about E equals MC squared and still live a good moral life, an ethical life. That's true. Equally, you can be the most genius scientist in the universe and be totally miserable and neurotic and beat up your husband every day. This is also true. Now, the Buddha's point about his view of reality, which he has said he has found to be true, he is not asking us to believe him. He says, go check it out, like Einstein would. This is what I have found to be true. This is how I have found to be the universe to be this way. And he says, then the job is to remove from the mind the misconceptions that cause us to believe in things that don't exist. Because he says that's why we suffer. So he says the extent to which our minds are caught up in misconceptions, he says it's a misconception that a creator exists. And he's got all his logical reasons for it. He's not being rude. He says it's a misconception that your mind is your brain. He says it's a misconception that your mother and father make you. And there's all these other viewpoints that are contradictory to his viewpoints. So of course he's saying he's right. Don't believe him. Don't think he's being arrogant. He's perfectly allowed to say it. And then he backs it up with his findings. And his point is essentially this. By living a good ethical life, and we can go into that, that's karma, and then by removing from the mind all the misconceptions about who you think you are and the way the universe is, and by developing compassion and wisdom, this brings you into sync with how things exist, therefore cause you happiness, therefore you become enlightened. That's how Buddha's talking. So it's an extensive, detailed, deep, vast presentation of the entire world. It is actually, I always forget the phrase in science. It's a something for all. What's the word in science? It's answers to everything. What is that called? What do scientists say? They're looking for the something that's everything.
Like a grand unified theory?
Like a unified theory. Buddhism is a unified theory. I don't think I'm being arrogant. I'm simply presenting what the Buddhist view says. It's up to me and you to find out if he's right. He could be a peanut who's talking rubbish. But it's who's going to find out? You, if you want to. You don't have to. So it's a unified theory about the universe, about it's how to get happy, it's how to stop suffering, it's how to get wisdom and how to stop ignorance, and it's how to lead a good moral life and stop harming yourself and stop harming others. But the point in Buddhism is these all come together. They all come together. If you get wisdom in Buddhism, you're also getting compassion, you're also not harming others, and you're also getting happy. It all comes together. It's all integrated. But that, of course, is for us to find out. So the reason, so to think that you just sit down and close your eyes and be mindful, and then something mystical happens, is like beyond idiocy. It is embarrassingly stupid. But we think we're so intelligent in our culture. We think it's like that. So it's a long-term job. Don't hold your breath, okay? Because it's engagement in these ideas and views. And of course, that's why you have to choose it. But the crucial thing to never forget, the thing that we do know about, that we know that makes sense, that we think, yeah, I'd like that, it is a method to get happy and stop suffering. That we all know we want. That's the main drive, I'd suggest, for all of us. We're not sure if we want wisdom. What's that all about, you know? Just being clever, because we think it's like that. No. Wisdom is what brings happiness. Ignorance is what brings suffering. And on the basis of these, we then act stupidly and harm others, which causes more suffering. So by living a good ethical life, by learning to remove from the mind the stupid misconceptions that cause suffering, we learn to get wisdom, and that's the method for getting happy. That's the method for then finally achieving this end result, Buddha, you know. So when I first met the Dharma, I just listened for 1 month, went to Lamazow was teaching every single day, didn't have a clue, but I went. And then Lama Yeshe would come along. I was tired with relief because suddenly he seems to make sense because he talked about the mind, you know. But I know when I heard the teachings, the word that rang out from my mind was the word karma. And I heard it meant cause and effect, which is not much explanation, but I knew that was something that I'd been missing in my life. You know. It was very powerful for my mind. And from the very beginning, my experience as being at that course, the idea of karma kept me grounded. So I'll explain. I don't know if I talked about this before, but I'll say it here, you know. So at that point, for about 10 intensive years, from the time I was 19 to about 9, my process when I'd first given up being a Catholic at the age of 19, I went through this intensive process of being a hippie and a full-on political activist, hippie and then communist, regular lefty, and then black politics and feminist politics. For 10 full years, full-on, intensive, 100%. That was all. I didn't have a profession. I left school when I was 16. I didn't study anything. I thought there was nothing there to study. It was so boring in the whole world. I didn't want a profession. I did initially, but didn't want eventually. So it's full-time political activity, overwhelmingly filling my mind with concepts and views about the way the world is and how to try to make the world a better place. I was very sincere, you know. By the time I got to about 29, I really thought I'd exhausted all options. And then I got to this course. It was a bit of a shock, a culture shock to me. I'd been a hippie first. That was 10 years before. Suddenly I come to this place where it's all these hippies again. I was like reverting. It was like a culture shock. I really got so shocked. But the crucial one, and I don't remember I've talked here about this, but I've talked about it. Certainly some of you might have heard. For me, that was the part that really made me think about karma, really forced me to think logically. Because when I first, initially, when I was being a radical feminist, that was my latest political activity, being very serious radical feminist, serious radical lesbian feminist, serious radical lesbian separatist feminist. I was on the outer, and I was always serious in every philosophical view I had. I really put my money where my mouth was, you know. So for me, it was really blatantly evident that if this supposed seeming Asian, Tibetan, coming from India, you know, view of the universe, which put men above women, etc., 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 I felt if this is the reality of what Buddhism is, and if it's innately negative and inferior to be female, well, what in the name of God in heaven am I doing here? I could not possibly stay, you know. So I know it was such a huge shock for my system, such a difficult time for me to really come to terms with these things. So I knew I had to check carefully. And that's when I heard that really found very empowering, always hearing that Buddha says, don't just believe what he's saying, but check it out. That was empowering for me, so I persevered. And then this idea of karma, that we've got this mind that comes from before, and what we think and do and say produces who we become, and that's not just now, but in the future, then it seemed absolutely evident to me, you know. What really struck me clearly even then, it's been hard work though, was that who we are, male, female, cisgender, transgender, whatever the words are, what do you call? There's one where you don't feel you're either. I feel like I'm that one now at my age. What's it called? Neither girl nor boy. What's it called? In these days with genders, what's that called? By something.
Non-binary.
Non-binary, that's me. Yeah, that's the one. I feel like that one now. Definitely I can say that one. Definitely. I know I've got these things here and, you know, nothing between my legs. You understand, being blunt as usual. But I feel like that one, you know, if you want to identify. But the point is this. We can see in the world, can't we? We all identify with labels, with groups, labels. And we get very freaked out about labels, and we can be very rigid and fanatic and obsessive and fundamentalist about labels, which is half the reason why there's wars on the planet. I'm this label and you're that label, so we all fight, you know, because we see them as contradictory. But what really struck me then, especially in relation to male and female, that one, because I mean, there wasn't such thing as cisgender and non-binary back then in the 70s. Or lesbian for that matter, whatever. It's fine to identify with a label. And it was for me, that was the thing for me, it was very powerful in my political activity to finally get to becoming a feminist. Because when I first was hippie, that was fine. Then it was like serious, hard-edged, radical lefty politics. But I wasn't poor. I wasn't working class. Then it was hard-edged supporting black groups at the time of the Black Panthers in the early 70s, George Jackson and the Soledad brothers in California at the time of the beginning of the Panthers. And one of my friends was a literary agent, and she was George Jackson's agent, and she was the one who got published this book became very famous called The Soledad Brother, George Jackson's memoirs from prison. This Black Panther. And then he got killed, and there's this huge celebrity thing, you know. I remember, and we had a group, so I was a friend of that woman, and we had a big group in London called the Friends of Soledad. It was full-on political activity. It's so powerful. And again, it was supporting black people and all the kind of the whole revolutionary, you know, the imperialist business in the world, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, I wasn't black. Then I got to become a feminist. It was getting closer to home. It was me, you know. So then that was really powerful transformation of my mind, learning to recognize all my own suffering in terms of being female and the whole way the world is and patriarchy and blah, 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 whatever, you know. It was super powerful because that finally was me. But then when I got to and I realized at that point that I'd exhausted all options of who to blame for the suffering of the planet, you know. All the non-Catholics were the problem, and all the poor people, the rich people were the problem, and the whites were the problem, the males were the problem. But suddenly it was nowhere else to go. So then I bumped into these Tibetans. This was Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa. I met my teacher's first teaching. Very fortunate. I fell into their lap. They started to tell me I should look at the mind. And that was a brand new idea. I'd never heard of that before, you know. So here I am all these years later. 40. What's that? How many years is that? I forget. 1976. It's 44 years, right? Whatever.
42.
No. 44. We're 2020 now, darling. 76 to 44. 76 to 20. What is it? That's 44 years. Whatever, Betty. Thank you, darling. So whatever. Who cares? 79 doesn't matter. But the thing is, the mind is the one, and then the way, and this is the point, the mind is the one. So the Buddhist psychological thing was an incredible revelation to me, to know your own mind, because that's where your suffering is, baby, and that's where your happiness is. That was a shock. But the other one, the law of karma, that runs the mind, that is the source of who I become and is the cause of what I will become, that was so powerful, you know. So these are the fundamental kind of nuts and bolts of the Buddhist views. So then the view of karma, the view of compassion I heard about, that was almost too high for me. I couldn't even cope with all that. I couldn't cope with this concept of bodhicitta, like saints, you know, it was just too much for my mind initially. But the idea of karma and the mind, and that's the nuts and bolts. And most of the times I've got to do this job. Lama Zopa told me to do this job back in 1987. This is all what I talk about. I mean, because it's the Buddhist teachings. But it's almost, I keep saying, I joke and say, I feel like I'm being seen as a fraud one day, because all I talk about is this stuff, right? But this is what the Buddhism is. This is the nuts and bolts of Buddhist psychology and Buddhist philosophy. And we can see, I mean, I'm talking to a person recently who's a sincere Buddhist, done years and years of practice. You know, it's really hard to practice karma because we don't think enough about it. We love to quote compassion and all these things. We don't look into the nuts and bolts of karma, which is the basis, junior school, entry level, grade 1 basis of profound practice. And upon this, we then build our practice. And we can only really have valid compassion and we can't have until we really got a sound understanding and a practice in relation to the laws of karma and in the way the mind works. This is fundamental Buddhism. It's fundamental Buddhism, you know. So I realized when I heard all these teachings, and I thought it through, because I thought, if Buddhism is saying that innately as a female you're inferior, as the culture seemed to indicate, certainly Indian culture, with its absolute certainty. I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised still they burn the live wife on the funeral pyre of the dead husband, because she's a part of the possession. She's the chattels, you know. We know that worldwide is like this. And then I realized, if I have got past lives, if my mind continues from life to life, it is logical I've been a boy countless lives. And it is logical, therefore, and this is the point that I'm getting to, whether you're cisgender, binary, this, transgender, male, female, whatever you call, or dog or monkey or anything else, those are merely shapes and shapes, ways of expressing ourselves, ways of presenting ourselves on the planet. French, this, that, they're all just external packages. And how we're seen and treated is due to the past karma. But the essential one is how we identify ourselves. Who am I, you know? So the Buddhist one that I began to get even theoretically then was who we really are, if you want anything at all, is it's absolutely not the body. It's your mind. And your consciousness or your mind is not male. It is not female. It is not transgender. It is not binary. It is not non-binary. It is not cisgender. It is not French. It is not even human. This is the point. You know? These are just packages. Animal, dog, white, red, black, female, male. They're just karmic packages. As a result of certain actions, we create the cause to get this form and get this shape and get this identity, and then and the way we are seen and treated by others. So that was a revelation for me, that we are fundamentally consciousness. And anyway, finally, for the Buddha, consciousness, if we want to identify with who we really are, even in terms of our mind, is not the anger or the jealousy or the depression or the ego grasping. So if you want to really come down to it, who are we? We're the mind. But not even those parts of our mind. The Buddha says these are adventitious. These parts can be got rid of. Why? Because they cause suffering. So who we finally are is positive, virtue, love, wisdom, intelligence, compassion, joy, bliss, all that. That is who we all are. That is who we truly are in our nature. That is who we are. That's kind of tasty. That's tasty. Because when you're a Buddha, fully enlightened, what you've done is you've completely purified your consciousness. You've completely removed from your consciousness all the neuroses, all the misconceptions, all the absurd nonsense, all the beliefs that we've had for eons and eons that have been leading us up garden paths. You've removed utterly all misconceptions, utterly all emotion, neurotic emotions, all ego grasping, all sense of separateness, all attachment, all anger, all nonsense. You have wisdom that is in sync with reality. And because you've cut a sense of a separate self, you have infinite compassion with all beings. So that is who we actually are. That is who we are. And everyone has that potential. That's how come I'm still here. Betty's disappeared. What happened, Betty? Where have you gone? 44 years later, I'm still here. That's up to me. I mean, you don't have to. I'm just telling you my story. That to me is the most powerful one, who we actually are. Because we want that. That's what we're searching for. Everybody, whether you become a cisgender or a non-binary, or you want to become a girl, or become a boy, you want to go French, you want to become a lesbian, whatever it is, these labels we use that we're used to being brought up with, and we switch, we become something else. Because we're trying to find who we are. We're even just trying to find our profession. We're trying to find one that connects with who we are. Mummy wants us to be a lawyer, but we discover we want to be an artist, and it's a revelation for us. Because we're trying to discover who we are. We're trying to become who we are. We're trying to become our authentic self. This is marvelous. This is marvelous, you know. So the Buddhist approach is, and that's what I found shocking at that course I went to. When we mix in groups together, don't we? We find people who look like us, or you know, or our group. It could be tennis players. If you're a fanatic tennis player, you'd be bored to tears hanging out with cricketers. So we always connect with groups, and then that's our people, we say, isn't it? And that's fine. So for me, because I was a jazz fan, I didn't like people who liked rock and roll. If I was that political group, I could not stand that political group. And that's how we tend to go, isn't it? But then when I came along to Buddhists, I came to my first big Buddhist course, suddenly there were hippies, there were ex-communists, you know, there were Christians, there were Jews, there were people who liked rock and roll. There were people who liked, and I felt disconnected. And that's a very common thing that I find many people feel. They're not my people. They just got, but slowly, if you try to work together, if you've got these, you're all buying into this view of the Buddhas, that you're trying to find, you know, become this authentic self, the way Buddha says it, which is a virtuous, wise, blissful, clear, compassionate person. That's what the Buddha says is our true self. Then that becomes the thing that you share, and your music and your race and other things become secondary, you know. That took time, I have to say that. I mean, me going to that group and there was not a single feminist there, I felt like I was in a foreign country, you know. It was like a completely different, but this is the thing. So this is the real one for me, the Buddhist one. This Buddhist view that kept me continuing, that my mind is who I really am, not my shape, not my body, not my nose, not my color, not my gender, not my being a musician or a carpenter. They can be useful, but as a method to help us become who we really are. And Buddha calls that Buddha. So let's look at even what that means, you know. Look at how, I mean, we're saying it often enough, but what are the components of that person? Well, like I said before, the Buddha's view is a person who's a Buddha, their consciousness or their mind, which is not physical, would be rid of completely. Of course, this is so abstract in our science and our philosophy, of all things that are limited and unhappy and deluded and depressing and anxious and worried and jealous and angry and attached, all the neuroses and all the misconceptions about, you know, no cause and effect, and my mind is my brain, and blah, 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 all the misconceptions gone from the mind, which means for the Buddha, we're in sync with reality. So, of course, the thing to keep remembering, Buddha's view of what reality is not something that he has made up. He's not a creator. He's not a creator. Einstein didn't create relativity. He observed it to be true. That's the Buddha. So that's up to us to find out if Buddha's right or wrong. And no, you can ask a million people what they think of what Buddha says, but until you are certain, you have your method for checking, and that's what you're supposed to be doing every step of the way, ticking the boxes as you go. It can't happen overnight. It's going to take time, you know. So our true nature, who we really are in our core, is our goodness. So that doesn't mean we've been that already and then have lost it. Not like that. That's a very strong view in Christianity, which is very powerful. I remember talking to my Jesuit priest friend about this. We all know the teaching, roughly speaking, in Christianity is that God made us in his likeness. And then we lost the plot. So the Buddha's view is, if we are the handiwork of a creator who is perfect, we have to be also perfect. A creator can't make an ordinary person. If we're an extension of the creator who is perfect, we also have to be perfect, and it could never become imperfect. That's not a possibility with the Buddhist view. Because when the delusions have been removed from the mind, when ego grasping and all the delusions have been utterly eradicated from the mind by all our hard work, they can't come back. You've burned the seed. If you've burned the seed, it can never grow again. So that's the point. That's why at a certain point in our own Buddhist practice, there's different stages where we make these huge shifts in our realizations. So the major one is when we've had our first non-conceptual insight into realization of emptiness, a negating way of putting how things actually exist, which really means recognizing how everything is interdependent at the subtlest level. When we've realized this absence of the fantasy nonsense, that's the shift that we've made. From that second, you've burned the seed of all misery, all suffering, all rebirths, all delusions. You can't fall back after that. That's a major shift that we haven't yet done. The Buddha would say we've had countless lifetimes of being amazing beings. We've had realizations before. We could even have had bodhicitta, but we've lost it. And when we realize emptiness, that you cannot lose. You can only move forward after that, So that's a major shift in our progress. And then eventually we get to bodhicitta. And the combination of wisdom and bodhicitta and the perfection of these two, that's what ends up you being a Buddha. Rid of all the delusions, full of wisdom, full of clarity, full of love, compassion, because these are at the core of our being. That's a really fascinating concept, actually, because we give equal status, don't we, to anger, attachment, love, and compassion. They're all normal parts of a normal person. With absolute certainty, the Buddhist view would say that's a mistake. The delusions have a particular kind of way of existing and functioning, but they're not rooted in reality. They've got no basis in reality, and that's why they can be removed. Whereas virtue is, relatively speaking, in sync with reality, with interdependence. And interdependence is how things exist. So Buddha's saying no one makes you a Buddha. It's not like you get rewarded. There's no concept like that in Buddhism because there's no rewarder and there's no punisher. We do it to ourselves, which is the view of karma, So discovering our own true nature are very literal words in Buddhism, which is actually very, very compelling and very inspiring when we can even read the literature, read about these things, think about these things, hear the teachings about how mind is naturally pure, which doesn't mean, like I said, that you've had it and then lost it, but that's always our potential. So I like to use the analogy, they say in Buddhist teachings, we all possess Buddha nature. It's not the way we phrase things in our culture, but it's a bit like I use the example of an acorn. I always like that example. A seed, basically. But an acorn, you can kind of see it. It's a cute little thing with a little hat on, So an acorn, first of all, this interesting point. If you see an acorn and then you see an oak tree, for 1,000,000 years, you would never see the connection, would you, until you're taught. Until someone teaches you that is a potential oak tree. You can never see it. It's not evident, is it? And I find that, first of all, a good analogy for us. Here we are now, a human being. We're a bit like an acorn. And we identify with being an acorn. And we think we want to be the best acorn on the planet. So we smooth ourselves out and get rid of the wrinkles and change our hats every day. And we identify with being who we are now, which is very concrete, very limited. Buddha says it's like thinking you're an acorn. You are an acorn, but you don't realize the potential of an acorn. An acorn can become that incredible tree, but we just think we're an acorn. It's like very limited, profoundly limited view of who we really think we are. This is the Buddha's view. So, and he says we are a potential Buddha. So an acorn, you would say then, by definition, possesses oak tree nature. We don't talk that way, but now we get the words. Buddha says every mind, every consciousness, every living being, every mind possessor, a worm, a human, an animal, Mr. Trump, the pedophile, they all are mind possessors, and their consciousness, their mind, yes, polluted, yes, deluded, join the universe. But that's adventitious. That does not define who they are. Finally, ultimately, they are a pedophile. They are a murderer. They are a saint. But that's just still, it's like saying you're a cricketer. It is true, but it's not who you really are. That's the Buddhist point. And who we really are is our goodness, our virtue, our wisdom, our compassion. And he says we can rid the mind of all the rubbish and we can grow the other stuff to perfection. So every mind, every being possesses Buddha nature, is by definition a potential Buddha. There's kind of powerful meaning. So and then when you realize that even though you are angry and are depressed and are jealous and are psychotic or whatever you call it, it can be rid of. You can be rid of it. You can remove it eventually from your mind. It doesn't define who you are. It is not at the core of your being. This has major meaning in Buddhism, to think about this. So it's very encouraging. Whereas look at how we feel. It's the attachment and the fears and the anxiety and the limitations and the depression. They loom large for us. We believe they are who we are. We identify with that part, and that's no wonder we're miserable, you know. This is just beyond tragic. When Lama Yeshe first met Westerners, he could see the intensity of our self-pity, the intensity of our hopelessness. All he did was try to lift us and to get us to see that that is not who we really are. It's true, but it doesn't define us. This is the point that Buddha's making. It's huge. And we're talking psychology here, not some religious concept of a next life, you know. Not like that. Our true nature. So to know I'm full of rubbish and depression, anxiety, and limited and fearful, like this little acorn, limited, but to realize it's not who I really am, but I can use this acorn nature and I can give it the right conditions so it can turn into an oak tree. A good analogy. So we have to identify with our potential, and that's what Tantra is. These practices where you visualize the Buddha, you visualize Tara, you visualize Chenrezig, you visualize these amazing Buddhas, and you want to become that. So you identify with becoming that. Super positive. It's like super positive thinking, super positive psychology, extraordinary. You know, it's very powerful, very uplifting, very an antidote to all the rubbish. But we can see how the irony of ego is we are sort of like addicted to the misery. We're addicted to identifying with the depression and the misery, being the acorn, in other words. We can't see our potential. This is our tragedy, you know. So the view of karma is actually a powerful logical reason to help us understand emptiness. Because you see, when we try to think about emptiness, the ultimate way that things exist, Buddha's way of presenting it, he uses various arguments about how things exist interdependently, dependent arising, in order to help us prove that there is no intrinsic self there. So the very first example, an excellent example of the first level of dependent arising, which is that everything comes into existence in dependence upon causes, and we're talking about me here, I am the fruit of my own past causes. So we don't think that right now. We think I didn't ask to get born. Someone else made me. Someone else gave me anger or jealousy or depression and plonked me on this planet and said, get on with your life. I mean, that's as scary as hell. But that's what we believe is true. Buddha says it's the dumbest thing he's ever heard. Mummy and Daddy gave us a body, that's all. We come running like a magnet. They're lying in bed having sex and we jump in. Come on, don't blame them. Good Lord. So this idea of karma is very powerful, because when we take more and more take on board the view of karma, that I am the fruit of my past actions, whatever I think and do and say now is the fruit of having said and done and thought it before, what I do say and think now produces who I become. This is very powerful. It means I'm in charge. I produced myself and I will produce myself in the future. I better get on with the job. I better learn the laws of karma. So what that does is it causes us to stop feeling self-pity. It causes us to stop feeling I didn't ask to get born, someone else made me, it's not my fault. It causes us to become more grown up, more self-contained, more self-confident. So just thinking about karma, and what that does is loosen the grip of this vivid, rigid, concrete self-pity me. So it's a powerful way to start loosening the grip of ego grasping, which is to help us understand emptiness. Just thinking about karma. Because immediately you don't identify with this me, set in stone me, miserable me. It's very powerful. Let's just calm. First one. And of course, because as soon as you think, if you totally identify in this life with, say, being a musician, and I'm not being rude about any of us, but this is how we all are. You've found your calling in life, and this can be so powerful. I mean, look at some little children at the age of 3, they're playing Bach. It's clear that music is their second nature. They have found their being already at the age of 3 because of strong karmic connection with that activity. So they completely define themselves in being a musician. They spend their lives thinking about music. Identify with being a musician as if this is who I really am. And then look at the suffering when you can't play piano because you lost your hands. You'd kill yourself because suddenly your whole being, who you think you are in your bones, has been shattered. So no wonder we get depressed. And that comes from grasping at certain components of ourselves as being who we really are. Well, this is a real mistake. Yes, you are non-binary. You are transgender. It's taken you great courage to get to the point of changing from one to the other to become who you are. You are a girl. You are a lesbian. You are this. You are a carpenter and not a musician because you want to be one. So we need to make these choices. But we make the mistake, the Buddha says, of over-exaggerating the status of that and defining all of us in those terms. He's just simply saying we're not all of those. Because last life you were a boy. Next life, you'll be a dog if you're not careful. So suddenly that shatters the idea of who I am in my bones, Whereas if you think of yourself as virtue and wisdom, that is indestructible and beginningless and endless. So next life, you'll be a nice, wise, compassionate boy. This life, you're a nice, wise, compassionate transgender. 3 lifetimes, you'll be a nice, wise, compassionate girl. Doesn't matter. You'll take a form that's useful to sentient beings. You just play acting as a transgender, play act as a girl, play act as a non-binary. It's for the sake of sentient beings. Then it's relaxed, Yes, you're a carpenter, but it doesn't define your inner being. Yes, you're transgender, but it's not at the core of your being. Yes, you're a girl. It's not at the fundamentally in the nature of who you really are, because that's your consciousness, which is beyond shape, beyond form. So we need to find what works. We need to know in this life the way to develop myself as be a musician and not a carpenter. That's valid, but we should not cling to it too strongly, because that's what attachment does. We over-exaggerate that status and say, this is who I am. Well, if you are, that means you can't change, you can't shift. It's impossible. So be who we are within the fact of emptiness and within the fact of bodhicitta. Then it's perfect. I've just been raving on tonight. I'm sorry. Any questions? Any questions, anybody?
I just want to say that was really beautiful. Really, really well put, and definitely getting through to me. Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Well, it's a pleasure. Well, any questions? Any more points to bring up?
Venerable Robina, I have a question
Greg.
about the Buddhist model of the mind.
Yes, Greg.
Sometimes, we read about how our love can get mixed with our attachment.
Absolutely.
But technically speaking, since a virtuous and a non-virtuous mental state can't arise at the same time,
That's right.
What's happening is like both of them are firing off simultaneously so quickly, it seems like they're mixed. Is that right?
I mean, the thing is that I don't know. I think that there are like thousands of moments in a finger snap. So it's unless we've got single pointed concentration. It's like our awareness is so gross. We couldn't even begin to see how the moments are all mixed together. Effectively for us, they're like a big soup. And we don't have any clarity, any precision, any awareness whatsoever. And so absolutely, of course, that's a great term. It's a great thing to know. Technically, it's correct, but virtually for ourselves, when we think we're loving, but it's actually being attachment. So yeah, because it's so gross, our awareness of what's going on in our mind is so coarse. That's right. Exactly. Great. That's right. Or even one is running. Mostly 90% is there, and occasionally love pops up, but mostly it's attachment, for example, or mostly it's anger, but a tiny bit of something else. Or we just literally, yeah, but the thing, they're definitely separate, but we conflate them and confuse them. And
Right.
that's a major, major problem. To begin to have some awareness of what's motivating us more radically, moment by moment, is pretty intense. And then that's right. And yeah, that's right. Exactly what you're saying is perfect. Yeah. Good. What else, people? Any questions? Any points to bring up? Any discussions? Any point to go further with?
This is a little bit off topic, Venerable Robina.
Yes, sweetheart, yes.
Yes. You've talked before about anger, and I was wondering if you have any tricks that you use for sort of the moment you might flip to anger, kind of converting it, not only stopping it, but converting it into compassion. Is there like a trick that you use?
No, it is. There is, of course, there is. But the real key to success, Charlotte, aren't you? Charlotte, who are you? I saw your
Yes,
name.
that's correct.
The real key to success, honey, is the sooner you catch it, the easier it is to change it. But our problem is 99% of the time, because we don't have much practice in being conscious of the mind every second, we only notice the mind when it's shaking and it's volatile and it's physical. But then that's a bit late. That's the wheels falling off. And that's mostly only when we notice the anger. So it's pretty incredible to be able to grab it at that point, because it's Vesuvius about to explode and it's almost too late at that point. And most of the time it is too late. The best we can do is damage control. This is a really major point. We don't, in our culture, we do not have skills to notice what we're thinking and feeling until it's too late. And that means we don't notice what we're feeling until the body is very vividly involved. We give such power to our physical, we just give such power to our physical experiences. Who's that, Erin? Just, oh, it's off again, yeah. Can you see what I'm saying, Charlotte? Suddenly, can you turn your mute back on?
I see it, but assuming you can catch it, can you convert it? What's your trick? Do you convert it into compassion?
The point is, when you catch it, when it's merely still a conceptual story and not emotional, and that's pretty sophisticated, then it is easy to hear the story. Don't forget about transforming it into a compassion yet. That's too advanced. The first level of practice, at like the junior school level, at high school level, at the middle scope of the lamb rim, at the level of being your own therapist, when you're knowing your own mind intimately and noticing what you're thinking, when you can hear the angry conceptual story building, and then you catch it and you argue with it. You don't try to transform it yet. That's ridiculous. You argue with it, and if you're really skillful, it will dissipate and you'll stop believing in it and you will not follow it. That's advanced practice, but that's what we're aiming for, because it's a conceptual story. Anger is a conceptual story.
Can you give an example of how you might argue with anger?
Well, tell me what anger's saying. Give me the story that anger's saying. And this is exactly the necessary point. What is anger saying?
Anger saying is, this person mistreated me.
That's right. In other words, you're saying, even more direct, you're saying, how dare they do that to me, aren't you? You're saying that, aren't you? How dare they do? And the hurt is so strong, and you're thinking it the whole time, and you're thinking exactly what they said and exactly what they did. But the feeling is, how dare they do that? I don't deserve it. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Would you agree that's the essence of the anger? It's like a shock, isn't it? So to really get that,
how could they?
How dare they do it? What? Go on. What?
Yeah, exactly. How could they?
So to get right down to it, it's saying, how dare he do that to me? You got to finish it. I don't deserve it. That is fundamental to hear in what anger is saying. That's why we get angry with other people out there. How dare those evil people do that? Those poor innocent victims don't deserve it. Can you hear what I'm saying? Or you don't agree? Charlotte?
I haven't made the connection.
Well, think about it. Think about yourself. Surely just saying, how dare he do that to me? It has to be, the hurt is, but I don't deserve it. How dare he? What do you think you're saying? I don't deserve it. It has to be that. That's the real voice of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right.
Can you hear it? The shock, the horror. Why would you be shocked otherwise?
Right.
Understand, darling? So when we can hear that, that is let's do an analysis of that viewpoint. It is a viewpoint. Let's do an analysis and show from the Buddha's perspective how that's not a valid viewpoint. What's all the other noises? What's happening? Or just your connection's a bit weird, is it? That's okay. So let me just talk about it, Charlotte. Stay right there and I'll ask you some things. Okay. The real way to understand this is we have to try and understand these two main states of mind that Buddha, he's got 84,000 and he narrows them all down to three. The three poisons. This is so profound. The root delusion, that's the source of all the problem altogether, is the very wrong, instinctive, primordial sense of a separate, concrete, solid me. That's ego grasping. That's the main one that drives everything. On the basis of this, there is this massive attachment every second of the day, this junky inness that is frantic to get what that supposed me wants. So the more we can understand attachment, the more we can understand anger. So let's look at the philosophical views that are in fact what attachment and anger are. These are the two main voices of this supposed I that Buddha says we've made up. It's deeply instinctive, deeply primordial, and countless lives old. So the attachment is the motor that drives every single second. So think of this person who just did this bad thing to you, right? Think of this event. What's happened is anger is this outrage because attachment only wants nice things. So anger is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So what drives anger, what is beneath anger, what informs anger is attachment. So the voice of attachment is, I only want the nice things every single second. And why? Because I deserve them. So whenever good things happen, we just automatically take it, are delighted, and then really are begging for more. Because there's a deep assumption in attachment, which is the junkie that only wants the nice things. The assumption of attachment is we deserve only the nice things. So when it doesn't get what it wants, then the outrage of anger is I don't deserve the bad things. These are the actual viewpoints deep in our bones of these two main delusions, attachment and aversion. And we live in these, and our pain and suffering and jealousy and dramas and all the other stuff come as a result of these two fundamental problems. So the root of it is the frantic junkie inness that only wants the nice things, that only wants the happy feelings. And that means only wants what I want. So I will be happy as long as everybody does exactly what I want. The noise is the noise I want. The music is the music I want. The food is the food I want. The traffic has to be the traffic I want. Every single second of the day, it has to be only the nice thing, because attachment is junky inness that can only cope with the nice thing. And the millisecond the unnice thing happens, that's anger, annoyed, irritated, frustrated, or especially outraged when a person does it. How dare he do that to me? I don't deserve it. But the voice of attachment is saying, give me more, please. We don't ever ask why do good things happen. We only ask why do bad things happen, because of attachment and aversion. These are really quite primordial, really quite nuanced and quite subtle. And these are running every second of our day. And they're the source of all our suffering. Can you hear that at all?
I can't. So basically, so if one recognizes that one is about to explode in one's own attachment.
That's way too late. Not possible. You've got to notice it well before it gets anywhere near the body. And that's what long practice brings. I'm discussing things at a more subtle level here.
Well, I notice it as sensations. I begin to notice it's sensation.
What sensations are you talking about here?
I notice sort of cortisol. I notice when I start to get stressed. So I notice there is a moment I feel like where I can catch myself.
That's still, yeah, it is, it's true. And that's, at least we can get to that one before we explode. What I'm trying to, for the second, Charlotte, what I'm trying to do here is being a bit theoretical, just to try to give us the big picture. What I'm trying to talk about here is we really do begin to get a handle on this kind of practice. And I'm talking about years of work. I'm talking about it at a much subtler level. We really can begin to hear these assumptions of attachment that are driving everything. And then that's what causes us to have the panic, the stress, the anxiety, the worry, the upset, the frustration, which is mild anger when the baby things happen. So darling, don't wait for some person to do some mean thing and you're going to explode. When you drop the cup, wash the dishes, when the red light comes, when the baby events come, when your attachment gets upset and annoyed because it didn't get what it wanted, that's the time to do the work. Then you'll be ready for the big one. Can you see my point?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You're saying work on the attachment so that you don't get to the point where you're having to catch yourself from exploding.
Work on the baby attachments. Like we don't think we, you know, when you drop a cup while you're washing the dishes, I don't know anybody who doesn't get upset in one way or another. But you wouldn't go to your therapist, oh, I dropped a cup today, I got upset. They tell you to shut up and go home and stop wasting their time. Why? Because we wait till the wheels fall off. We wait till your boyfriend punches you in the nose before you go to the therapist and get raging, angry and despairing. But we have to catch the baby moments. That's when the wheels are wobbling. That is a moment of thwarted attachment. Every time you get annoyed with somebody, slightly annoyed, every time the red light comes, you get irritated because everything stays in the mind, nothing goes astray, and we don't ever deal with it when it arises because we wait till it's violent before we deal with it. That's the point I'm talking about. That's why we have to have concentration, and that's why we have to learn to be our own therapist and catch our thoughts and feelings, because there's 1,000 thoughts a second. Not just wait for the big ones to come. Can you hear my point? It's throughout the day, catching all your thousands of thoughts. That's really, really, really advanced. But that's what we're talking about eventually, to get to that point. And in that case, you would never lose the plot. You would never get depressed. You would never lose your mind because you're so in touch with it, so sophisticatedly at this moment by moment by moment level. I'm talking about advanced practice, but it's very inspiring to hear that's where we're heading.
Yep.
Can you see what I'm saying?
Thank you. I do.
Good. So slowly. But at least when we feel the sensation coming in the body, which is when it's pretty gross, at least even then, if we can catch, not too bad. But the learning is, that's why I'll use the dumb analogy, like you're on the freeway at 120 miles an hour and you realize your wheels are falling off. That's when the sensations start to come. It's a little bit late. We haven't bothered noticing the wobbling all the years of the wheels. You know, we wait till they fall off. That's our problem in our culture, and that's a very deep problem. We don't know we're depressed until we're inert in bed. We don't know we're angry until the words are vomiting out our mouth. It's just way too late.
Maybe to put a fine cap on it. So let's say the small things happen, like the baby attachment, the cup drop. It's Charlotte again. I just want to put a fine cap on it.
Go on.
Yeah. So a baby thing happens. You drop a cup and you want to get upset, and so you notice it. You notice it's.
No, hang on. The first.
What do you tell yourself?
Well, think of what you got to argue with what you're saying. So what are you saying when you drop?
What do you say? What do you say?
What are you? I'm asking you, when you get annoyed, what are you saying to yourself?
Oh, I lost that cup. It's my favorite cup.
You get stupid. You shouldn't have broken a cup. We get angry with that.
That's right.
So then you counteract it. You simply say the opposite. It's cool, Charlotte. It's only a cup. It's all right, darling. Relax. Like you'd say to a child. Okay. That's what you're doing. Every second, being your own therapist, you're adjusting your conversations. It's nothing mystical. And then you learn from it. Okay, maybe it was your $1,000 grandma's cup. That's fine. You learn your lesson from it. But it's to hear it, because see, the whole character of all the deluded states of mind is they're eye-based, they're tense, they're stressed, and they're distorted. They're exaggerating. And they're the ones that are always there. And this attachment to being a good girl, for example, is very primordial in all of us. And that's often the one. It's like mummy's on our shoulder every second judging us. And we're trying to be a good girl. That's the deepest attachment we have, to be a good girl, not to do naughty things. This is a very deep attachment, a very deep attachment. So we tell ourselves off. We get guilty. You know, this is a very subtle way attachment and aversion manifest. So to catch it, to hear it, and to fix the story, be your own therapist. Quite literally, you talk. It's like a child. You say something nice, you fix it, you adjust it before it buries in deep and becomes something that gets bigger later. Because nothing goes astray unless you deal with it. That's what post-stress, whatever you call it, is. You know, except serious levels of living in denial for years of the painful situations that we weren't able to see and bear. So we push everything away. But it will come out eventually. Do you understand what I'm saying? Charlotte? Yes?
Yes, I do. I do.
Good, darling.
I do. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Any other points?
Yeah, Robina, what if we waited to that point where it was too late?
We do, Sasha. That's our problem. Now, that's why we have problems. That's why we cry and get upset and have divorces and shout and get hurt and get cheated on and get harmed, because we're as thick as posts, because we're not noticing what the hell is going on in our mind at any level at all. That's why we are suffering, Sasha. That's the point, honey. You hit the nail on the head.
So what do we do then?
If you're going at 100 miles an hour and you your wheels are falling off, damage control is the best you can do. So the least you don't kill yourself and kill your boyfriend. That's about the best you can do. But you learn from your experience. You've got to learn from it. I better start watching my mind before I get crazy. That's the learning from it. You see what I'm saying? Sasha.
What could we
Sasha.
do?
Wait, Lynn. Are you seeing what I'm saying, Sasha?
Yeah, but for me, it's kind of after the fact. I went through this sort of thing a long time ago, and I'm just kind of dealing with, what do I do?
But that's how life is, Sasha. Have you not noticed that? So try and hear. Okay, I understand, Sasha. So what's your actual question then? What's your actual question, sweetheart?
Well, I think you were kind of talking about preventive medicine, but I'm more dealing with after the fact.
But everybody is, Sasha. I'm giving us an advanced approach to it. We are all like you. We are all dealing with our broken wheels and falling off and anger and depression. That's our point. But I'm trying to give us a long-term view to show our potential. That's my point, Sasha. To learn what we can do. And then we start to play it. Practice now and start now, you know? That's the whole point. Can you understand the point?
Yeah, I do.
Good, darling. Good. So what's your point, Lynn?
So what happens after? So I've noticed, okay, it's gotten into a really bad argument.
Darling, I can't hear you very well. Your mic is never, your sound is never very clear at all. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. I'm sorry. So
please ask your question. What's your question, darling?
What do we do to lessen the karma after the argument?
It's like you're saying, what do I do once I've broken my leg? What do you do once your wheels have fallen off? You fix it and you learn from it and you try to not do it again. That's what you do. And then that's why you have a proper practice. That's why all in this path to enlightenment, all the practices are laid out. All the different levels of practice are laid out. First level, entry level, junior school, grade 1, stop killing, stop lying, stop stealing, stop bad-mouthing. That's your instructions. So even though you learn from your mistakes, that day you then decide, I'm going to start changing. So I'm going to not harm sentient beings with my body and speech. And that becomes your main practice. And every day you attempt to do that. What else can you do? Then you get to more advanced level and you start to learn about your mind. And then you get to more advanced level and you start to practice compassion. It's progressive, one step at a time, like learning music, learning to drive a car, learning to do anything. You start at the beginning and you just keep going.
I've noticed that I've been aware when I'm upset, and I'm aware of the words that are coming out of my mouth.
So what's the question, darling?
What could I do after the words come out? Are there?
I've answered already, sweetheart, and I know you're not hearing me properly, but I have to give you the proper answer, and I've done it. What I've just said, the last few sentences is the answer. You start at the beginning, Lynn.
So start over again, basically.
I beg your pardon?
So basically start over again next time and just let that.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm talking Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist practice here. I sent documents to everybody, to Andrew, to send to everyone with all the points about this stuff that I'm describing with the described practice, and it's all in there. The teachings about karma, the teachings about how you purify, the teachings are all in that book, sweetheart. So if you want to become a Buddhist, if you want to learn to be a Buddhist, you have to learn the steps, learn to know what to do, just like if you learn anything.
Okay.
That's my big answer to you, sweetheart. That's up to you to decide.
Thank you.
All right, sweetheart. Are there any other questions? Any
I
points?
have a question.
Yes, Erin.
Kathy, can you see me?
Is that Erin, is it? Is it Erin?
No, Kathy.
Oh, where are you, Kathy? Let me just see you. Sure, darling. Talk to me, Kathy. Talk to me.
Hello, can you see me?
I can.
Okay. I'm trying to put this succinctly into words. As I've started to try and let go of attachment, I've found that during the happy, joyful moments of life, times with my children, times that I'm already knowing that I shouldn't be attached and that everything will change and that everything, and so I'm not enjoying the moments that are even the good moments because I'm trying not to attach to them.
I understand that, but that's not possible. Until you're highly evolved, you can't get rid of attachment. So all you can do is learn about it while you're having your experiences and make the distinction between love and attachment. That's what sophisticated practice brings. You have to learn to know first theoretically what is love, and then you have to know theoretically what is attachment. And given that you're an ordinary person right now and haven't realized emptiness, it's only really by then that you start to realize you're not, but it's progressive. You learn about it right now. You learn about it yourself. So when everything's going lovely, we can't tell the difference. But as soon as your child stops doing what you want, that will be the test of whether it's mainly love or attachment. If you start to get annoyed, that's because you're attached. If you start to be forgiving and loving and wise and skillful, that's because your love prevails. So when everything's going lovely, it's impossible to see the difference. So enjoy the moment, but the lesson is when the attachment stops getting what it wants and the kid doesn't do what you want, or the boyfriend doesn't do what you want, or the traffic doesn't do what you want, because that's the second attachment doesn't get what it wants. And if you get annoyed, that's the proof it was mainly attachment. But that's normal behavior. It's just how we are. We've got to realize attachment's very primordial and very deep, and it's very long term. But all we can do is learn about it moment by moment by moment and adjust ourselves as we get more wise.
I guess I'm just anticipating. I'm anticipating the change before it even has happened.
Well, that's anticipate it, recognize things change, but recognize things change. Like you're driving the car, if you start panicking about thinking a car's going to come crashing into you any minute, that's not realizing emptiness. That's not realizing impermanence. That's being neurotic. You got to focus on driving the car, but in your mind, you know that you could die in a second. And then, of course, because it's true, we can. People die in 1 second on the road, even if you're doing perfectly, but not to be overwhelmed by fear of it. That's neurotic. If we live in a fantasy world that I could never have a crash, that's idiocy. And then we go to the other extreme of anticipating a crash every second. That's another level of idiocy. But to recognize within the fact that you're driving a car, you do your best, then karma takes care. When you focus, you're doing what you're doing, you enjoy your children, you have the happy times. And then when something goes wrong, then you learn about you learn about your mind. It's a learning. Every second's a learning.
That makes sense.
You understand, darling? When we factor in, you see, right now, the delusion is that nothing is going to change or everything is perfect. So then suddenly we hear that everything's going to change. We start going to the other extreme and anticipate it every second. That's neurotic. That's ridiculous. Because it's just embedding it into your natural way of being. This is how life is. You enjoy each moment knowing it could change. And when it does, you'll be ready for it and it won't be neurotic. You'll be okay. You'll handle it. You'll be able to change on a dime. Do you understand?
Yes.
Good. But another one, it's very interesting. Another one, I remember a woman recently talking about how she's just continually thinking about how her husband could die, panicking all the time about it. So she kept saying, well, how can I try and live in the moment? I said, forget about living in the moment. Just simply tell yourself he will die. Confront the fear. It is true he will die, but you don't know when. Meanwhile, enjoy his bloody company and relax. Instead of, or people might say, he won't die. Of course you're going to die. But meanwhile, you've got him, be happy, and you wake up next morning, he's still alive. What a bonus. You enjoy each moment that way. And then if he does die, you'll be ready for it. Do you understand?
I do. That's exactly the kind of feeling that I have that she has.
There you go, darling. It's going to change, but you're ready for it. And it becomes more integrated into who we are, and we become more relaxed and easygoing and less freaked out when things change, and we're able to then deal with it, knowing that that next one will change as well. So you flow with it. I mean, it's easy to say these words, you know.
Yeah.
You have to have confidence in the process. But the real key is when the thing does happen and the change does occur, or the thing happens when you don't get what your attachment wants, that's the learning. That's the moment to learn. Look at this, you know, I must have still some anger. I'm still grasping at permanence. And you catch yourself and you adjust again, and we keep learning. It's like learning anything. It's step by baby step. You understand?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Keep trucking, girl. Good. Thank you. Who else?
Rabina, it's Lorna.
Yes. Oh, Erin's got a hand up. You next, Erin. She keeps missing out. Go, Lorna. Please, sweetheart. Good.
Oh, okay. Could I just offer an example of how I've
No, you don't need. We've got no time. Just give us a little. Just ask a question. We've got so many things to talk about. We've got very little time left. So just ask.
It wasn't a question. I just wanted to give an example of how I've taken some of your advice and practiced it.
Maybe we just rejoice in your practice, Lorna.
Okay.
All right, darling. I rejoice. Erin, you had a question. Erin.
Hi. I don't have the hang of this Zoom client on my phone here, but
we can't see you. Your face has disappeared.
Yeah, because I paged on my phone to the driving mode so you can hear me, but
all right, darling, never mind. So I can hear you, darling.
Yeah, the question I had real quick was like, say you're ready to stop being an acorn and you want to become the oak tree. I don't live near a center. I'm not near a I
understand.
Like I'm not in Laguna Beach.
I understand.
And everything. I was just wondering what next steps or what a good step would be for someone.
I understand, sweetheart. I mean, okay, it's like any, and I really mean this sincerely, it's like any body of knowledge. Let's say you suddenly decide you really want to learn tennis. Now, and there might be no tennis club in the whole of Laguna Beach. So it all depends. So then you've got to know, okay, with tennis it's kind of difficult because you've got to have partners and things. But with something like this, it's to begin by studying. I mean, the fact is right now, because of COVID-19, suddenly every center in the world is doing Zoom, which is amazing. It's a very powerful tool. In fact, I know many people before even Zoom who, you know, because there's so much on YouTube, so many people I've met over the years. I've been watching for 10 years. I've learned so much. Then they read books and they go to classes and they do a retreat. You get what you can where you are, you know, you take what you can where you are, online, on Zoom, do courses online. There's so much you can do. You can develop, and you can even develop, remote communities, because it is like that these days. So there's so much you can do. But then, and so you just keep moving. You follow. You check where you like. You go to this place. You check that course. You do this one, and you'll find your way. You'll find what suits you. You'll find the courses that suit you, and the teachers that suit you, and the methods. And then you'll discover there's a retreat happening on the other side of the coast, or there's a retreat in Nepal, and you'll go, guess what? I'm going to do that. And you just keep moving, Erin. But you have to lead the way yourself and follow your heart and follow your intelligence, you know, and really take because there is so much available these days. There is so much available. But you be selective and clear and use your common sense as well. But that's, for me, the best way to go. And eventually you'll connect with groups, and you'll connect with your spiritual family. You'll meet your teachers, and you'll find your home. It's like that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, because I'm not such a good student with books, and you know, I love what you wrote, but you know, when I have to read books, I feel like I don't get it as much as when, you know, there's practice involved in all that. So
I understand. So also the other thing is, if you do like what you've heard so far, and you know, but it's still good to hear the teachings, even though you might want to study it, but to hear it's good because you can hear it as you're going along. But the other one is to develop some kind of morning and evening practice, because we're creatures of habit, aren't we? We like some structure. It's good for our minds to do that. So if you'd like something more like that, if you really want to talk about that, you're very welcome. Get my email address from Andrew, and you can write to me. We can discuss if you'd like to do that.
Wow, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much, Venerable.
Okay, sweetheart. Anyone else have any questions? 2020. What time do we start? 7, because it's nearly time to finish. We've got 2 hours, haven't we, Andrew? 2 hours or hour and a half?
2 hours tonight.
Okay, good. We've got 40 minutes. Okay. Questions, people?
Venerable Robina, I have a question.
Where are you? Sarah or Bray? Sarah, which one? Oh, no, it's not Sarah. Who is it? Bree. How do you say your name, darling?
Yeah, Bree is
Bree.
my name.
Okay, sweetheart, go talk to me. Hello, Sarah.
Okay, Saturday during your talk, you said something and I don't know if I understood, or I'm wondering if you'll expand on. In the time leading up to death, you said something about there's a particular time where either the karmic seeds that are being planted or the karmic seeds that are coming to fruition have like a greater influence on the next rebirth. Will you say more about that?
Yeah. I will, exactly. I will do that, exactly, Brie. So what happens is this. Every second that we're living, we're like, as many moments as there are, you can say as many seeds as you're planting. Because whenever your mind's doing anything, and then your body and speech carry out the actions of the mind, that's what how we live our lives. You're sowing all these thousands of seeds, right? Some of them are positive, some are negative. It's just the way it is. It's just join the universe. So that we're gathering all these seeds in our little bank vaults, if you like. Can you hear me okay? All right. So then at the time of death, and it's really quite precise the way they describe it, probably a couple of hours before you stop breathing, this process starts, this deconstruction of the various components of the person. So in that first process, before you stop breathing, which is when the world thinks you're dead, which is when your gross consciousness ceases, your sensory consciousness ceases, and your main level of conceptuality stops. You know, you forget who you are, you can't recognize friends, your senses go, and by the time you stop breathing, your gross consciousness has ceased. But it's in that period, about the second or the third point, where this other very intense grasping and fear kicks in, fairly normal for most people. And that becomes a trigger to kind of like the ATM card in the bank. It causes your money to come out. So that triggers the karmic seeds that initially will be the one that, like in your case, being a human, like the rest of us, we can deduce not more than a few weeks before you found your way to your mummy's fallopian tube at conception, you were in another body. So we can deduce also you must have had a fairly peaceful death. You could have been an animal. It doesn't have to follow you're a human, but let's just say you were a human and you were dying and you're going through this process. And about the second or the third stage, when your senses start to go, this fear is fairly strong. It kicks in, but it triggers the karmic seed that will be, in your case, triggered a virtuous karmic seed of non-killing in the past, which is the cause of why we get a human body. And as Lama Zopa says, to get the life that we've got with our good conditions and our wish to practice a spiritual path now, that's pretty much, we can say that karmic seed that was triggered that caused you to find that particular human mother was the result of living in morality in the context of a spiritual practice, even living in vows of non-killing. A very powerful, delicious, intentional non-killing karmic seed was triggered. And right then, already you were programmed to go to your present mother. At the same time, all the karmic seeds that would produce your personality, your tendencies, your qualities. And the next level, the next karmic seeds that produce all the experiences you have, who you're going to meet and how they treat you. All those are triggered. All the karmic seeds that are now playing out in your life were all triggered at that point. And that's why, as Lama Zopa says, that is the period. If you have to help anybody in this life, your pussycat or your grandmother, that's when they need you most. It's sort of like to hold their hand, to help them navigate that period when you can eliminate their fear and make them feel comfortable and calm. So that's when the karmic seeds are triggered. You know, that's when, so especially if it's your cat or your dog, you just put the mantras on, you put them in a very safe place, and then that period, and when they hear the mantras, that can help their mind stay very sane and calm, and it can connect them very strongly with the Buddhas, and even can cause them a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered that will give them a human birth. That's the period when we need help most. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay. All right, sweetheart. Good. Lama Zopa's book has come out. I think it's out already from Wisdom a couple of weeks ago, called How to Face Death Without Fear. And it's his handbook. All this is described. All the practices are there. Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have a question, please?
Could I just follow up on what Aaron said?
Who is that?
Bill.
Yes, Bill. Go, sweetheart.
I have been sort of doing what you recommended, which is sort of shopping around, I guess is the way you'd say it. But your teachings exactly. And the way you teach, I've been listening to for about 7 years and really responding to. So my question was, what is the junior school book that I should be picking up? Or is there a specific daily practice? Because I feel like I found where I want to be.
Exactly, Bill. Okay. Well, you see, the thing is, all these things we talk about, sometimes I just talk about them seemingly randomly, but they're all talked about. The framework is in my mind when I describe. So when we talk about karma, we're talking junior school. When we talk about being your own therapist, we're talking high school. When we talk about compassion, that's university. When we talk about emptiness and then tantra, tantra is like postgraduate. So we can talk about them randomly. But when you know yourself, if you've got a body of knowledge, you're a good gardener, you'll know as soon as you hear a person talking, they're talking basic stuff, they're talking advanced stuff, and you'll see where it all fits. That's a major point to get. If you become familiar with Buddhism, you like the path, it's really helpful to get the big picture and know where it all fits. So then that becomes your tools throughout your day. So at some point, let's say, if you know that you've really got uncontrolled mouth, your main practice will be shut the mouth. That's junior school. If you know you're more together with a certain person, you might just watch your mind and be careful how you're thinking. Another person, you might be able to actually practice compassion. So you've got to know where you're at and at which tool you use at different times. And that only comes that familiarity comes by studying the big picture, you know? Mm-hmm. So there's so many books out there on the whole big picture. And there's certainly one that we use. I mean, it's one that was put together from just that it's been used actually in the Discovering Buddhism, FPMT Discovering Buddhism mod. I don't know if you've heard of that program. Have you the FPMT's Discovering Buddhism study program?
I've seen it.
Okay, well, those kind of things would be really helpful to do if you like just to do.
Okay.
There are 12 different modules, and that it's taking in this kind of structure that we're talking. But the third of those modules is actually the entire path, and the course notes that are used there are in fact a teaching I gave at Land of Medicine Buddha on the whole path. And then we use that I got a book of it. We use that as our course notes in the November course in Kopan last year. So I mean, I'm very happy to send that to you. That's all the Dharma from A to Z. Junior school, high school, university, and I use those terms, you know. And then once you start studying more depth, you read the Dalai Lama's book and it's all about emptiness. You know where it fits. Then you read this book and you know it fits there. You read that one, you know it fits in this place. So it's good to have like the map, the order of things. That's very powerful. Do you understand?
That's exactly what I feel like after this weekend I am looking for is the map of where.
And then you should, I mean, I can send this book to Andrew. And it's just,
that'd be amazing.
Yeah, and he can send it to you, or you can ask him for it, you can email me, you get my email address from Andrew, no problem. You write to me, it's no problem.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, sweetheart.
Oh, can I ask one more thing just on that topic? You said that, you said something so interesting that when you get a first non-consensual full realization of emptiness,
yes,
which to me feels like it's saying, that will come to you after a culminative experience of all of this stuff.
So first of all, it's non-conceptual, not non-consensual. Non-conceptual.
Oh, non-conceptual.
Yes. It's okay. I mean, I swallow my words so fast. Non-conceptual. So it's actually what that is, as you must know from listening, that's when you've got single-pointed concentration in meditation and your mind has gone beyond the sensory and beyond the conceptual to this more subtle level. So it's that's what it is. That as a first
that makes all the difference.
That makes the difference.
In the world.
Thank you for that.
I'm glad I asked. Thank you.
I'm glad you did. Yes. Okay, people. Any more questions? Huh? Well, somebody did say about purification, so maybe I should talk about that again. I thought we did that already, but let's just do that again. We always have to keep doing it. So the thing is, when we remember, the real purification happens when we realize emptiness, actually. That's when you cut the root. That's when you burn the seeds. So until then, we're kind of like putting atomic bombs under the negative seeds, preventing them from growing. That's really what purification is, you know. And so these are these are the terms they use in Buddhism. But if we try and change the terms and just think what they're saying, it's actually really quite simple what purification means, you know. I mean, I use ordinary examples. I find it so helpful. If you've been playing the piano for a long time wrongly, according to, you haven't been obeying the rules of Bach. You've been playing the wrong chords or the wrong tunes. You're playing it the wrong way. Then that's like negative karma. You habituate yourself with negative tendencies. So what is the obvious antidote to that? You habituate your mind with the right tendencies. It's hardly rocket science, you know. So the most obvious way to, if you see you've not got a tendency to lie, the most obvious way to quote unquote purify it is not just it's to stop lying, but it's to tell the truth. It's the most obvious. The second you tell the truth, that kind of puts an atomic bomb under the habit. So every time you play the right note on the piano, that counteracts and weakens the habit to play the wrong note. And the fact is, this is how we learn everything. In the beginning, when you first learn math, it's not that you're not doing maths wrongly, you just don't know maths. So what do? You learn math. And that is the antidote to the ignorance of not knowing math. So this is what practice is. So some practices, you're activating the virtues, and some practices, you're stopping the non-virtues. Either way, it comes down to the same thing, you know. So when we talk about karma, the process of karma, this law of cause and effect, if every millisecond of what we think and then do and say literally programs us, that's why we have to become conscious. That's why we have to learn the law of karma. You can't just say, oh, it's karma. You got to know the nuts and bolts of it. It's really obvious, you know. Then you become more aware. You control your body. You control your speech. And then at the end of the day, you do the purification practice, which is another method of changing your mind. That's all. First of all, the first level of practice, as Lama Zopa says, you stop sowing more negative seeds, but you don't kill, you don't lie, you don't steal, blah, blah. And then at the end, and then you purify, or you put atomic bombs under the tendencies to lie, steal, and kill, and that's the purification practice. So it's just these 4 steps. You acknowledge you did something, you regret it because you're sick of suffering. Then you think, whom can I turn to? You rely upon the Buddha, the doctor. Then you have compassion for those you've harmed. Then you do a little practice to counteract, and then you make a decision to change. It's very logical and natural. When you play the wrong note, you don't go kill yourself. You recognize first I played the wrong note. Then you rely on Bach's music to give you the right note. Then you do it, and then you make a decision not to do it wrong again. And guess what? You become a musician. So it's training your mind, programming your mind from negative to positive. That's all it is. And we think of it like that because it's hard work, because the habits are very deep. But as long as we stop we've got to get away from this concept of punishment, reward, good, bad, guilty, wrong, you know, religion, the misconceptions we have about religion. This is practical psychology, and I can't stress that enough. And the more we know that, and the more we know that we're in charge, the more optimism we'll have, you know, and the more brave we'll be, and the less guilty and neurotic. Because guilt is one of our main problems. It's very deep in our bones, but it's a really neurotic state of mind, and it's no use whatsoever. It's just another version of ego, you know, and it's just anger. Instead of saying, you did this and you did that and you did this and you're a bad person, you say, I did this and I did that and I did this and I'm a bad person. Guilt is anger and you're the object. And it's kind of ridiculous, you know. It's like a crime against ourselves. We really have to learn to stop that one. And it's very hard because we're very addicted to it. Because we just live in denial. We can't cope with the truth, you know. So acknowledging where we're at, acknowledging our foolish things that cause us so much suffering is like compassion for yourself. It's not beating yourself up at all. We think it's like that. Because if we can't recognize a mistake, how can you solve the problem? You can't. What else? Did we talk about emptiness at all? Did we, Andrew? I forget. Did we discuss emptiness, Andrew?
Not too in depth.
Well, I think maybe we should do that. Our last 25 minutes, because everything leads to emptiness. If you want to, you know, everything working with karma is an example of dependent arising, and dependent arising is the king of logics to prove emptiness. Then looking at your mind, realizing how delusions are embellishments, they exaggerate, they distort, they cause us not to be in touch with reality. That leads us to understand emptiness. So we get to eventually to all of this leads to Buddha's view about the nature of how things, the very ontological status of how things exist. So of course in the world we think, well, that's just philosopher's job. What am I doing that for God's sake? Well, you've got to do it to cut the ego. You've got to do it if you want to become happy. You've got to turn, that's where you really turn this acorn into the oak tree, you know? You want to develop your marvelous potential, everything leads to this. And it's the subtlest level of the mind. It's the most sophisticated level of how things exist. The whole of Buddha's path is how things exist. Things, he said, you're not created by somebody else. Things, the reality is it's cause and effect, and you're the boss. your delusions are the main problem, not your boyfriend or not your mother. So he's got these different views about reality. So getting in touch with these levels of reality already are priming our mind and becoming already a marvelous person. And now we get to, the nitty gritty of getting to the root neurosis, the root delusion, the very grasping in the bones of our being, which informs attachment and aversion and all the rest, that believes deeply and primordially, but beyond articulate. It's so subtle, so pervasive, so ancient, that causes us to believe 1,000,000,000% that there's a real, solid, findable, pointable, definite, isolated, independent little mini me in there that runs the show. I mean, we don't think we think that, but this is absolutely what we think it is. It's behind everything we think and do and say. So it's really hard to hear it because we can't hear the mistake, So the recognition of that mistake, the insight into, and that's where I'm talking about, we said before, to Bill. It wasn't Bill, it was Greg. No, it was Bill. It was Bill, yeah. When we have so these are the words for it, when we've got this single pointed concentration, this shamatha, they call in Sanskrit, this calm abiding, this brilliant level of cognition at a subtler level, that, like I always say, we don't even posit as existing in modern psychology, that is been around since these Indians well before the Buddha. They're the ones who came up with this brilliant psychological skill that enables us to have complete control over the grosser level of consciousness, to go beyond the conceptual, beyond the sensory, to this subtler level of cognition that is just mysterious to us at the moment. The best we can do is say the words, but it's a refined, subtle, powerful, super brilliant level of mind, like the microscope of your mind. And it's at that level of mind that, after much work and much practice and much analysis and much meditating and much purifying, we can then do this type of subtle analysis and then deconstruct and get to recognize clearly for the first time, directly, non-conceptually, that there has never been, isn't, and never could be that fantasy independent I. From that second, we cut the root of all nonsense. From that second, you can't fall back into suffering but rebirth. You can only go forward, because there's no longer this vivid sense of a separate real me. You know it's not true. And therefore also too, fears stop. The neuroses, all the neuroses we have are rooted in fear. Fear is their taste. Fear is the flavor of attachment, anger, all the neuroses, because all those neuroses are based upon the belief in this fantasy I, which the Buddha says doesn't exist. He's not saying I don't exist, but we got the wrong end of the stick about how the I exists. This is the point, And the Buddha says, everything that exists like this. Everything is interdependent. Everything exists in dependence upon causes, conditions, and this and that, and therefore nothing has an intrinsic, separate, isolated entity. I mean, these words are not how we think, but this is Buddha's analysis of how we think right now, based upon these misconceptions in our minds, And this is why we suffer, he says. So the word emptiness really throws us. It's just shorthand for the ultimate way that things exist. And that throws us too. What do you mean the ultimate way that things exist? We don't talk like that. It's just shorthand. It's another way of saying, it's a negating way of saying how things do exist, which is that everything exists interdependently. You can't isolate everything, anything. Everything exists in dependence upon other factors. And this understanding of interdependence is a massively important part of Buddhist study and therefore Buddhist practice in order to realize these things experientially. Because the way we think the I exists in here is as a separate, independent thing. Independent of many things, but it's something we really feel. you know, that if we looked inside, I mean, for example, one of the discussions Buddha says we have to do this analysis is that, you know, we've got parts. We've got a body, we've got a nose, we've got an ear, we've got eyes, we've got mind, we've got love, we've got compassion. We're made up of millions and bits of pieces. We know that. If you sort of did the reverse IKEA, you'd come up with you'd have a big box of all the bits and pieces that make up you, wouldn't you? All the bits of your body and all the bits of your mind, and you put them all together and you produce a you. Think like that. Well, we're convinced there's a special part with all the other parts, along with the ears and the nose and the anger and the love and the kindness and the jealousy and the pee-pee and the caca and the atoms and the bones, all the bits you put together. We're convinced the main piece in there, a special one in a special box in the middle with shining lights around it, it's called I. We believe that. Buddha says, don't be silly. Not only there isn't one, you don't need one. The bits do fine doing their job of being I. Put it like that, you know. Well, it sounds hilarious, of course, but so when we do the analysis and we try to meditate on this to see how this I we think is there isn't, one argument, you know, one clear argument, one logical argument, which sounds so stupid to us. You know, I mean, they call this argument discussing if something exists, there's either one thing or there's more than one. So an example, I will tell you I have a cup. I have a cup. So how many nouns is this? Think in terms of nouns. There's two there, two things, two phenomena. There's I and a cup. Now, we all know if that is a valid statement, if I make a valid statement, you have to point to two phenomena, because I said, I have a cup. That's called two. There's the cup and there's the I. So in this discussion, it's very clear. There's no direct relationship. The cup does not need Robina for its existence. I could drop dead, the cup will be fine. My cup will break, because Robina's existence does not depend upon the existence of the cup. That's a classic example of two separate, independent phenomena. Very simple statement. Now we'll make another statement, and this is going to be the tricky one. I have an ear. Now there's also two nouns, right? I is one noun, pronoun, and ear is another noun. So that's two phenomena. I just said it. Two. I have an ear. Now, without analysis, we know that is a true statement. You can see it. There's the ear. Robina has an ear. Without analysis, it's no problem. But this is the point. It's a true statement. But Buddha says, because of this ego grasping in here, because of this primordial misconception of I, of self, we exaggerate the status of the word I. And we really believe in here that it too has a separate status, separate from the ear. As if when you were to search, you'd find a separate piece. Now, this is a really evident argument. The Christians say exactly that. You have a body and a mind and a soul, and God gave you that. That's a really evident example where Buddha, he diverged from that view from the Hindus. They called it an Atman. The Greeks call it an essence, a separate kind of essential little piece in there that makes you you. Buddha does not talk like that. Now, he's not being nihilistic and just saying there's no I. Evidently, I exist. Listen to me. Look at me. I'm shouting. I'm yelling. I'm here. It's evident I exist. But all he's saying is we don't understand the way we exist. We give extra status to the I. We give an exaggerated status to the I. We like add bells and whistles onto it. So it's a question of seeing that those bells and whistles are additions. You don't throw out the I altogether. That's nihilism, and that's the biggest mistake we can make in misunderstanding emptiness. So it's quite a nuanced point. So it's like this. the proof that there can't be, from our own experience, a separate I in there, in that box of IKEA of all the knees and the bones and the love and the hate, the pieces you put together to make up a Robina. You won't find that little shiny, special little central piece called I that you want to put in there, then the whole of Robina comes alive. No, you won't find that one. So look at this. If we do think there is that one, because we say it, I have an ear. Two things. If there were a separate I, this is the point now, if there were that little shiny separate mini me in there having special status, if there were, then when my ear is hurt, my I wouldn't mind. It would be like the cup and Robina being separate. If the cup breaks, Robina stays intact. If Robina breaks, the cup stays intact, because they're not dependent upon each other for their existence. But here, the ear is not the eye, and the eye is not the ear. But you can't separate the eye and the ear. But there's no separate eye. There is no separate eye. Because if there were, it would be watching the ear while the poor ear suffers and going, oh, phew, I'm glad it's not me. So in this case, it's a more subtle connection. The ear is not, there is no eye apart from the ear, but the ear is not the eye. So they're different. The ear is not the eye, but you can't separate them. In exactly the same way here, look at this. My cup has a base. This is a true statement. But if we analyze it, if we go further and you say, my cup has a base, that's two things. Let's point out the two phenomena. We'll take the base away. Let's remove the base. There's the base in my left hand. So what is in my right hand now? That is not a cup, baby, because a cup depends upon a base for its existence. So you can't separate the cup from the base, but the base isn't the cup. They're not separate, but they're different. That's the analysis to do. Of course, this is tricky stuff. Of course, we don't think like this. And it's not just playing games. This is to help us realize there's no intrinsic I, and to cut the root of the nonsense, and to stop all fears, and to stop suffering. This is a major step forward when we can realize this one. And everything we've talked about so far leads to this one. So any questions about that now, the last 10 minutes? As a brief summary of emptiness. One example of how to look at it.
So, Venerable Robina?
Yes, Alfred.
Okay, so what do you mean with that example, that it's that the eye, well, the ear is the eye is not separate to the ear, so the ear is the basis of the imputation of the eye?
The ear is one of the ear is part of the body and the mind are the basis of the imputation of the label I. Yes, up is the name we put upon the bits and pieces. Robina is the label, or I is the label we impute upon the bits and pieces. But the I isn't the bits and pieces.
Yeah,
but you can't
then
separate.
Yeah, and then why the eye suffer when something happened to the ear?
Because we call it that. Well, the eye does. We do suffer, but it's the because we have delusions and we believe there's an eye in there, so we are shattered and we take it personally. Like if you say, "Oh, your ear is so ugly, Robina," I will say, "Don't you dare insult me," because we believe there's this like separate eye. But when we analyze it and we know there isn't, when you insult my ear, not my ear wouldn't even be insulted, but there wouldn't be a feeling of an eye that's been insulted. So it's stories we've made up.
Yeah. I need to contemplate that, because, for example, I'm thinking about a superior being that actually has realized that there's no inherent
That's right.
I, and
so they realize there's no intrinsic I, Alfred. They realize there's no independent I. So then question.
Oh, okay, got it.
There's no intrinsic I, Alfred.
Yeah, the question is that. Yeah, the question is that in that moment, if something happened to the ear, to a superior being,
Yes,
he
yes.
doesn't feel anything, just as we feel nothing when something happened to the car or the cup.
Well, no. See, no, Alfred. The cup and the cup and the me are a radical example of not both separate and different. But here it's closer. You know, the cup would be affected if you take the base, if you puncture the base, you shatter the whole cup. So the same here. If you cut the ear off, that's Robina's ear. And there will be pain in the body of the person, Robina. But as Lama Zopa said, when he was drowning, he always tells this story. He told this story when he was 8 years old. As you know, he was recognized as the reincarnation of the previous yogi up in the mountains there. And he was recognized as a little boy. It means he'd realized emptiness. And he was drowning at the age of 8. He was a little boy in this. Have you heard this story before?
Yeah.
Okay, right, you know the story. I'll tell other people. He's up there in the mountains and he's recognized as the reincarnation of this past Lama. You know, who can we assume was a tantric yogi who realized emptiness, chosen his rebirth, blah, blah, blah. So there he is, and he was walking across this rickety little bridge. He's 8 years old, and he saw these people across the other side of the bridge who were very weird looking, up in the mountains, way up. They were pale, he said, pale eyes, straw-colored hair. I mean, white people, obviously. And he wanted to meet them. So he's bringing his little bowl of potatoes, walking across this rickety bridge, and he fell in the river. And the rivers up there are really treacherous, you know. So this is how he told the story. He's 8, right? He said, oh, the head, he said, not my head, or not I came to the surface for air. The head came to the surface for air. And he saw his monk freaking out, running on the bank, you know, having a panic attack because little Zopa's dying, you know. He's taking care of him. So then he said, because he couldn't swim, then he said, the thought occurred to me. The person known as the Laudo Lama, he was known as this Laudo Lama, this yogi, is about to die. He said, I didn't know anything about emptiness, which meant, of course, in that life, he hadn't heard the teachings, but there was no fear. This is the point now. I mean, this is just the experience. It's very powerful. Meaning, you know, we think, Mr. Darwin, I think, I always quote this, says we need this instinct for survival that causes us to completely panic, to freak out, to want to even survive. And we say that in science. Well, Buddha says, how foolish. It's called fear. That just makes a mess. You need intelligence to know how to survive, not fear, for God's sake. And we've all got it because we've all got ego grasping. So ego grasping is really like instinct for survival. But he wouldn't have had that because he'd realized emptiness in the past. So that, and you cannot lose that. So there he was observing the fact that he was drowning. His head went to the surface, but his mind, and this is too shocking for us, because he had no longer a grasping at a self-existent me, he didn't have fear. He would have observed what was going on, but he wouldn't have been freaking out. And he would have recognized, so he still went up for air. But we assume if he didn't have instinct for survival, he would have crashed, kind of gone to the bottom of the river like a stone and go, oh, well, I'm drowning. That's absurd. That's nihilism. He still struggled for air, but his mind would have been peaceful as if he's walking on the road. And he observed the fact that he must be drowning. But there was no fear because he had realized emptiness. In fact, he didn't drown because he's still here. So that's a powerful little taste, the experience of when you have no longer a belief in this frantic sense of a separate self, which drives every millimeter of every sentient being in the universe until we've cut the belief in that fantasy eye. This is kind of primordial, you know, psychology. So so he noticed he was drowning, Alfred. There would have been pain. He was been struggling for breath, but because his mind was peaceful and clear and wise, there was no ego grasping, no attachment, no jealousy, no anger, because there was no longer a fantasy eye to have all those voices of. They all had gone. So therefore there was only virtue and only clarity. He was observing that he was drowning. So if he'd punched him in the nose or hurt his ear, he would have observed that his ear was hurt, but there wouldn't be freaking out. He would feel the pain, but there wouldn't be stress and neurosis because there's no longer attachment.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Thank you, Bernardo. Because this is the second time I just heard the example that you said about the cup, but I was misunderstanding something, and I think I got it, and now I need to contemplate and meditate.
Well
Thank
done.
you so much.
Congratulations. I'll tell you even a more dramatic story, because this is inconceivable for us in modern culture, in modern neuroscience and modern psychology, because all the view of being an instinctive eye is embedded in all of our views. So this sounds just like weird. So there's this, especially this story. I remember one Lama, Kirti Senchab Rinpoche, he's passed away. I'll never forget the teaching when he said, he's talking about some level of bodhisattva, some great bodhisattva who's clearly realized emptiness, you know, an Arya being, highly evolved with enormous bodhicitta and realization of emptiness. Therefore, no delusions, no fears, no attachment. Try and imagine that. He said for that bodhisattva, and they're driven by immense compassion. For that bodhisattva, he said, the action of cutting off his hand and feeding it to a starving animal is as inconsequential as a leaf falling off a tree. That's the same as Lama Zopa's experience. That's inconceivable for us. But this is the example when there's enormous compassion and no ego grasping. That would be an easy thing. That's insane. So meaning he would know that his hand was cut off. He would feel a physical feeling. But this is the point that's so shocking. His compassion will be so enormous, not to mention his realization of no I, there would be no panic and fear. He would recognize it, but his compassion would override any problems. That's extraordinary. That's a really serious example, Alfred.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you.
All right, darlings. Time to go home. Andrew, that do. We're done for the day. We're cooked.
That's it? It's over already?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that's what we're done.
Shall we do a dedication?
We'll do a little prayer just to finish. Also auspicious to do that. Absolutely, let's do it. So we think this 2 hours gone like a dream, isn't it? I mean, it's gone quickly. It goes quickly for me, I tell you, and I'm one of going raving on. All these moments, as many moments as there are, is as many seeds we have planted. So be so delighted, be so happy. 2 hours of hard work, okay? And they won't go astray. They can't, unless we do something to them, you know? So we're going to nourish these seeds with our efforts from this moment forward, with our practice, whatever level it is, so we can develop our marvelous potential, so we can help others, so we can become a Buddha, so we can turn from an acorn into the oak tree. Every second, gradual, grow bit by bit. It's not overnight. One day you're an acorn, next you're an oak tree. No, it's step by baby steps. So you can enjoy the process, okay? So part of the problem is to stop identifying with being the acorn all the time and keep you frozen stuck. Keep identifying with your potential that makes you more excited and gets you there more quickly, okay? Gewadinu dudag lama sange drogyone drowa chikyang malupa dei sala kupasho Jangchub Semchog Rinpoche, Makie Panam Kegyuchi, Kepanyampa, Mepayam, Gongne Gongdu Baba Sho. Okay, sweethearts.
Just couple quick things before you leave, Venerable Robina.
Okay, good.
I'm going to hand it over to Carly in a second. If everyone, I sent a few of you private chats. If you can get back to me before I close it, I can add you to the newsletter and send any attachments and the YouTube links when they go up. But yeah, just a few words from Carly.
Okay, Carly, talk to me, sweetheart.
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. I know we're doing this virtually, but I still want to offer you a kata.
Oh, look at that.
And thank you. I want to, on behalf of Gampo Ludup and everybody who was able to attend the teachings virtually this weekend, we want to thank you for sharing your teachings. You really do touch a lot of people, and your teachings really resonate with a lot of us, myself included, I can say. We feel very lucky, and please live long. Come again. In person would be great. Over Zoom would also be great.
Good. Happy to do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
we'll be sending you an offering as well.
Thank you so much. You're so kind, everybody. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all of us being together. It's so auspicious. Thank you so much. Thank you, darling.
Thank you very much.
Much love, everybody. Thank you. Keep going. Never give up.
Thank you, Venerable.
Never give up, Lynn. You keep moving, honey, and you read those notes in, and you'll get the practices, all right?
Thank you.
And you can email me as well. You know that.
We are waiting for you in Brazil.
Oh, good. I know that. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, please.
Okay, darlings. Thank you. I'm leaving now.
Thank
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was good.
Thanks, everyone. It was a great turnout, great participation. Everyone had amazing questions and insights.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you,
Andrew.
Thank
Thank
you so much, Andrew and Carly. Thank you for everything you've been doing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, anything you need, feel free to email gompo.ludup@gmail.com and I can get you any of the documents. I can send the links to the YouTube videos once I get those posted and get you added to the newsletter for future teachings and announcements. So thanks again. You guys made it a really good weekend.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Leave.